Hi, and welcome to Leap, a podcast series by Startuplifers that takes you to Silicon Valley and back. The goal here is to have a warm and cozy conversation together with our wonderful alumni and hear their real-life stories from those who've made it, how the experience changed their life, and where they are today. In the second season of this podcast, we'll focus on remote work and how life has gone on after the COVID-19 pandemic. Startuplifers is a not-for-profit organization connecting emerging Nordic talent with startup jobs in the San Francisco Bay Area and also elsewhere, as you can see in this episode. I'm your host, Pauliina Alanen, and today I have the great pleasure to be here with Startuplifers, not actually alumni, but current lifer Joakim Isoaho. Joakim has a pretty interesting story as he's currently working from LA as a customer success lead at Matchmade. And he's been there throughout last year despite the pandemic. So let's hear about Joakim's experience in the States working in the remote setup and what he thinks about remote work in general. So welcome to the show, Joakim.
Thank you. Nice to be here.
All right, so let's get right into it. Tell me briefly about yourself. Who are you and what do you do now?
So like you said, I'm Joakim. I'm originally from Helsinki, Finland. Graduated from Aalto University with a degree in economics. And currently working at Matchmade, the customer success function for US clients over here in LA.
All right, and you have been there already since last year, correct?
Yeah, I came in February. During that time, there was just talk about a virus in Asia. And, things changed quite quickly in the first few weeks I was in the country.
Yeah, well, I bet. So let's go a little bit back to that time when you started to work there. You're still a student at Aalto University, right? But now you have been working already for more than a year from the States. How did it all happen that you ended up going to work at Matchmade and in that LA office?
I had finished my bachelor degree and started my master's. And started master's was because I was actually working already. I think it's quite common for a lot of people in Finland already that you kind of work on a part-time or finish your studies while you are working. So actually, I think I'm no longer even a student. They kicked me out because I haven't been attending for enough.
Oh.
But I think you can just apply back and get the degree done.
All right. Once you'll be back in Finland.
Yes.
So you live in LA currently and have been there for already more than a year. How do you like Los Angeles in general?
It's an interesting place. It's hard to describe because if you say LA, you're most likely talking about this huge area, this patchwork of different cities, different regions. I actually live in Culver City, which is inside LA County. It's also kind of surrounded by LA City. It's near the beach, but it's its own city. And it has its own mayor and own tax. And it's always weird when people talk about LA. It's a huge area, like a sprawl. I think that's the word. And
interesting.
Yeah, it's definitely because of that. They have made some interesting city design choices where instead of a real usable mass transit system like a metro, everybody uses cars. It's designed for cars. I heard a thing where like if you look at the freeway map of LA and change those to metro lines, it actually would become a workable city. But currently, it's a very car-dominant place. And I don't have a car. So it's been interesting.
So do you then ride Uber or Lyft a lot? Or how do you get around?
Yeah. So I'm an economics student. So I calculated kind of how much it would cost to have a car and insurance and stuff. And I saw I could have a budget of $100-$200 a month on Uber before it was like, even that's cheaper than owning a car or a car I'd like. So
Right.
I was like, why not? And I mean, I have a bike, I have an electric longboard that gets me places too. And some places have, like, there's one good metro line that works. There's some free buses that can work, but otherwise the public transport is quite terrible.
Nice.
I mean, but they're working on it though. I heard 2028 Olympics is a big deal, and they're going to improve a lot of things. And of course, like, LA is also, even though there's an increased presence of startup companies, tech companies, they're actually investing right now a lot into LA. A lot of people moving here from San Francisco and Bay Area. But it's also, of course, the epicenter for like entertainment and lots of social media apps, like something like Snapchat and TikTok have their headquarters here. And then all the creators mostly are based here too, or top creators. And that's kind of the reason why also Matchmade is here, as Matchmade is a platform to help creators actually monetize and get better partnerships. That's why we wanted to be in LA, to be able to be there where most creators come to kind of make their career.
Yeah, very interesting. Could you also describe us a little bit the team that Matchmade has in LA? And now that it's been this pandemic year, have you been able to like physically meet them, or have you been mostly working in the remote setup?
Well, thankfully I did meet them as I had a few weeks before the pandemic set in. And it's actually an interesting story. I don't want to go too much into it, but as Matchmade is a European company, now we work, my colleagues are not actually Americans. They're more Finnish American and stuff like that. But previously, we did have more American employees, but as far as I know, it was a bit of a difficult. It's very hard. I think if you ask any European company on hiring the first people in US, it's a very difficult issue, especially trying to find people with autonomy. That's one of the words usually been used. I don't want to make any huge assumptions, but usually with people here, it's less about kind of being a go-getter and autonomous, and more about maybe just being good at doing what you're told, at least at some level.
Yeah, probably. And maybe there's, like, if you think for a European company, now that you are in the West Coast, I mean, there's also a huge time difference. So when you have a small team there and then most people in Europe, it's obviously a challenge. So could you tell me a little bit more about how you've found your work there in LA during COVID, like in terms of like work hours, or how do you interact with your colleagues, for instance?
Yeah, so it's a double-sided sword, double-edged sword. How do you say it? Work hours, because I have to communicate with European team. That does mean I sometimes have to wake up at 6 or 7 a.m. because when it's 6 or 7, that time it's like 4 or 5 in Berlin or Helsinki, and you get a few meetings in, and it's tough. But also, kind of because of that, working from home has anyways been like okay at our company, because nobody wants to be at the office at 6 o'clock or 7 o'clock. So through that, it's been kind of natural to then, after those early day meetings before lunch, when those have been done, it becomes a lot more smooth and up to you, like a flexible schedule. Like, okay, do you want to go out and do something or continue in the evening, But with COVID, it's been difficult, as I think everybody who's had a home office knows. It's hard to separate when your work ends. And that's been the same case for me. So it some days has ended up being a lot of hours, and some days I try to kind of do some other stuff too.
Right. How about then the people that you interact with? I mean, your colleagues, but then you're also working in the customer interface as a customer success
Yeah,
lead. How has that been now that it's been all remote?
I think with my colleagues, my boss is Finnish American, so I mean we get along quite well because of that. And but still, you for sure miss some things when you're not face to face, and especially if you don't do video very often, and especially as in a business function where so many things are subjective and not objective, like a developer might have some objective opinions. Things can get pretty difficult, and not because anybody has any ill will, but just because the people aren't ready for remote work, or it's just something is missed that normally would be seen from like body language, or I don't even know, like facial movement and stuff like that. And on the customer side, I mean, it's quite interesting as I haven't had a single real face to face meeting with customers. Oh, actually, maybe one lunch, but it really has made all the customer calls are very like results focused and action focused, and I enjoy it. But I also kind of missed as we're still a startup, we're kind of missing those more open-ended discussions about, hey, how are you liking our product? What's going on? Is there anything you're concerned about right now? Or hey, how's your like what are your thoughts for 2021? Could we help you more with our product? What should we develop? Those kind of open-ended discussions that you could have on a client lunch don't really happen anymore. But mostly, it's still been interesting to kind of talk with like lots of huge publicly traded gaming companies, or even like also like private gaming companies and some other app companies, as they're mostly our clients. We mostly work with apps and mobile games.
Right. So if we now talk a little bit about like your life in general there in LA. Besides work, you say you have to sometimes do longer hours, but have you been able, with the pandemic situation, to have any hobbies or try some new things now that you're there in Los Angeles?
Well, I mean, to be honest, it's kind of like you're fighting a wave, or how to say, like, yeah, it's really, really, really difficult. Uh, I really liked going to the gym, and I also liked bouldering a lot before COVID, and both of those have been closed now for over a year, or close to a year. So a huge part of my like fitness enjoyment was just suddenly washed away. I tried to kind of replace it with other stuff, but it doesn't. It still, nothing still has really sticked. I tried. I mean, I tried like mountain biking and like going outdoor to climb and stuff like that, but they're a bit high maintenance hobbies compared to just going to the gym. And of course, like I was an I don't know, avid enjoyer of nightlife culture, and in Finland and abroad, but of course that was also kind of wiped out.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's not been easy. It has really put like I picked up some like old stuff like playing video games, and participating more in online communities. And I mean, it's been interesting too. I wouldn't have done it, I think, without COVID, but definitely a big change that I didn't think about.
Yeah, and it for you it kind of came almost immediately after you also moved to another country, so that must have been even a more drastic change. But let's hope that we can go back to those dear hobbies soon.
Hmm.
So you mentioned Matchmade has a team or teams here in Europe and then also in the States. Would you consider your company like remote friendly by default? Like what kind of working policies do you have, or are you like a global team where do you have people all around?
Yeah, I think I'm not. I couldn't say remote first yet because we haven't designed our. We're remote friendly, which means you can work from anywhere as long as people know you're there, and it doesn't affect like the quality of your work. that we're not remote first in the sense that our processes and our workflows and our organization is not built yet to be able to support working from literally anywhere. So you still need to kind of put a lot of effort if you're working from somewhere else. And but still, I mean, I've worked from different places. I've worked a few weeks from SF. I mean, I've worked a few weeks from the Bay Area. I was in Colorado for a few weeks, and I just came back from New York actually. And I mean, it's nice to go around, and especially the East Coast was an interesting experience with suddenly having 3 hours of more time kind of to catch up with European team was quite a big difference.
Yeah, it's probably much easier. Well, sounds like you've been able to still do some traveling, although just within the States, but still very, very nice opportunities to visit all those places.
Yeah, definitely. And I think, yeah, that's something people should definitely not miss. It's quite incredible how vast the US is and how different each area can be in the US, and how different lifestyle, how different feeling, and just the geography is. I mean, it's close to being unfair.
True. Had you been to the States prior to moving to LA?
Yeah, I visited. I was on the Alta US trip of 2016, I think. And then after that, I was here for, we were trying to get some partnerships for the Junction Hackathon. And we succeeded in getting like Facebook and stuff like that. But 2 times I visited, and as a visitor, it's quite simple. It's warm and it looks nice, and all the tech companies are here. But living here is quite a big difference. Quite a big difference.
Yeah, and especially this year or last year, for sure.
Yes.
But yeah, that has been, of course, the case, not only there, but everywhere. Anyways, since although you're in LA, but you have a pretty good view on like various companies and your customers, and you have probably seen some interesting remote practices kind of get born also in the tech scene that you follow and work with in the US. So do you have some like good examples, or how would you describe the remote work scene there in the States?
Yeah, it's interesting. Normally, I wouldn't really know many, or as a Finnish person, I wouldn't really know people in the US. But because of my time and Junction Hackathon, and just, I don't know, being open to talking to people or something, and the pandemic finally pushed me kind of over the fence to just randomly message these people I've met during my time visiting hackathons and organizing the Junction Hackathon. So through that, I suddenly found people that are working around the US in different companies. And a lot of these are actually mostly remote companies nowadays. For example, one company has only an administrative office in the Bay Area for their CEO and CFO and a few other admin functions, but all the developers are actually in North and South America, just scattered around. And they have a really like clear process on how they approach their work and how they divide their tasks, and that's what kind of puts them at the remote first ideology. And of course, they benefit from it all. And of course, there's still too some companies which are going like a step further. Last year, a lot of companies in the space of like virtual spaces, virtual offices, virtual conferences. I have a friend who has actually a virtual office for their company. He walks around as a 2D person in his virtual office. He has his own desk in that virtual office. It sounds quite weird, but you can actually check it out. It's called Gather Town. And he might bump into his office while like walking to a meeting, or, you know, walking around suddenly has this very intricate randomness in itself. And they're trying that out and seeing results and trying to mimic like, oh, those kind of water cooler conversations that we are missing. Like I mentioned earlier, like all meetings nowadays are quite they have an agenda, but they end up being a lot of random chit chat, and that's because that chit chat has disappeared from the coffee breaks, from the lunch breaks, in the normal office times.
Yeah, exactly. You need both. Definitely like the water cooler conversation and then focusing on action and the actual work.
Yeah, and I mean, we you also use that. I think many other companies, like have tried to use like something like Discord, which is also just something like you're kind of always in a room with a bit of audio, and you can choose if you want to listen or talk or just be on mute or not even listen. Just having that kind of like passive, hey, can you help me with this one thing, instead of it being a huge effort to send somebody a actual long request on Slack.
Yeah, exactly. Very cool. The company that you mentioned, I'll definitely check them out. And I think we're kind of in the beginning of this whole like remote work now that now that the pandemic hit last year, and we all had to go quite quickly, those that could, into the remote mode. But the work life has fundamentally changed, nevertheless, and will never go back to what it was exactly before the pandemic. Now that we're used to doing these remote meetings and not having to travel. Now that you have seen these like different kinds of remote setups and how companies are born global, not only in terms of their customers but also their employees, do you think places like LA, or even like more in particular Silicon Valley, which has been this very special place in the US, do you think places like that still matter in the future?
Yeah, I think like every year you get articles about the death of Silicon Valley or San Francisco, and last year you got articles about the death of, well, every single big city in US actually, or like huge, like new people were saying New York City was dead and San Francisco was dead and LA was dead, but these are all quite alarmist and false articles. Silicon Valley 100% still matters. It's still one of the only places where if you live out there and you have any random hobby, like, I don't know, like sneakers or, I don't know, knitting or, yeah, like, why not, like climbing or mountain biking. It's kind of the only place where these kind of side hobbies and you kind of find a group for them, and everybody else also works in tech and works in startups, and you can discuss all these topics the whole time. You're literally going to find only tech people there. And for some people, that's the dream. They want to work at a company that's doing something, that's working on like an international tech company or a tech company that's trying to solve some huge new idea, and they want their whole life to revolve around that. And I mean, it's cool. Like, if you're really excited about that, why not talk about AI while you're, I don't know, waiting for a sneaker job, or, I don't know, like skateboarding around SF, something like that. It really puts your career into a certain trajectory where you're constantly in that kind of feedback loop. And especially if you're still trying to think of an company idea, sure, like everybody you meet has actually something valuable to say about what you're doing. And you can see the difference already, like, and that's kind of the value, like I said, the feedback loop. And of course, not everybody likes that. They might want something different, and that's why, sure, you can live at different places. And some other cities in the US are now kind of getting hyped up and growing because not everybody actually wanted to live in Silicon Valley. They only lived there because of their job. They didn't want to talk about their job after their work ends, and that's fine too. But for people who want to engulf themselves into a really weird bubble of just tech and startups, sure, it's a perfect place. And then also, I'd say, like, if you look at the funding and networks, and I mean, if you have an established company, it makes a lot of sense to visit. Maybe not to live, but putting 2 to 3 months and trying to get as much face time with people there as possible when you are there, organize meetings, stuff like that, growing a network or participating in an accelerator, like totally. That's also a really, really, really good use of any company's time, at least as long as the US is the number one kind of tech startup machine out there. And like I said, like the example of my friend's company, where they have 3 to 4 people in their kind of Bay Area office, so that they can have their kind of investor meetings easily. They can meet with potential partners easily and stuff like that. But then the developers can be anywhere else. And I think that's also like why, especially nowadays, like why really would you need to have everybody on the developer side in the same place? This is one of the development work is one of the kind of, if you have a well-organized and like well-running project management process, it doesn't really matter if you're at the office or not. That's been my collection from talking to around 10 to 15 of my friends who are all developers. But yeah, if you want to be engulfed in technology ideas and startup cliches, sure, live there and make the most of it. But if you want the network or looking for funding, just do a few months and maybe establish a small office there for a while.
Yeah, I think you kind of nailed it with the tech bubble and really being like constantly around people who are working like startups and in technology.
Yeah, I mean, for me, like I'm also down. I have that side too. I mean, I enjoy that as well. That's why, but I also consciously made the choice of not choosing SF and chose LA instead, because I also have a side of also focusing on some like cultural, artistic things that I think SF might be a bit lacking in, and I wanted to balance it out. And so yeah, it's. I think it's also a balancing act.
Yeah, definitely. And it's interesting you say that. I still think that you can also find that side in SF, but it's just very well hidden. Like it doesn't come to your face like the tech does.
Mm-hmm.
Like when I was living in SF, I had to find this contemporary dance class where I was able to find the only people I knew who were not working in tech. Some of them were, of course, but they were also into contemporary dance. So I found that kind of gave me the
exactly
new view and cultural impact I wanted to have.
It's exactly stuff like that for sure. But even like going further, like you said, like even in the contemporary dance, some people worked in tech. It does get exhausting. I mean, there's a very certain kind of philosophical way people look at things in SF2 or like in the Bay Area compared to different parts I've now kind of been in. And also, I think the bigger question especially for like our context from Finland is, does America still, like how does America still matter? And that's more difficult. There is a reduced importance for sure. But I still think just for the funding, for the networks, it's still key to be able to visit at least. But living in US, I don't know, maybe not a long-term good decision.
Definitely agree with you on the visiting and maybe living for a while, just like you and I have done. So at least trying.
Mm-hmm.
So I think our time is soon up. So I have still one more question about the future of work. We talked in this episode a lot about remote work. So do you think that is here to stay, and what trends, or how do you see things changing now that well, in Europe you can work easily from any country. Traveling is very easy within the European countries, or even moving if necessary. So what would your kind of portray of future of work be?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's here to stay. Some employees love it, absolutely enjoy it. And it makes little sense to, depending on your function for sure, depending on how well your work can be like turned into tasks, objective tasks. If that's possible, then it's just a no-brainer. Like workers like it more. They can live wherever they want, and employees can reduce their cost of their offices. They can even pay less salary if the cost of living is not something like San Francisco or Bay Area. So that just seems like a no-brainer in a long term. And if you take that same example to like Europe, like, okay, what if a developer wanted to live in Spain for a while or Portugal? Like, sure, go ahead, and maybe you can reduce your office overhead in Helsinki and also kind of check the pay of the developer just a bit, just to adjust for the cost of living. And then I think that's something that's not just really like, I don't know, I haven't actually heard that much conversation about that in Europe. While here, here it seems to be so simple. Like just a few friends who worked at Tesla. One of them just moved to San Diego, and he was just like, yeah, I want to surf and I can work from where I want, so why not? And like some others have moved to Boulder in Colorado, and a few friends are talking about Austin, Texas, which is in a big hype cycle right now. And of course, people are also thinking about more. Actually, New York is coming back up, I think, as a developer destination too. And it just seems like such a simple thing. Why not? And also, like, why do you need to live in one place for a full year? Is also the question. And again, going to the European context, like for a Finnish company to have, I don't know, people in Estonia or people in Poland or people in Spain, I think for a long it's been kind of a weird stigma, like, oh, like why is this company offshoring, or why is this company like hiring people here? Like, can't they afford to hire somebody in Finland? Like, there must be something really wrong here, or really bad. And they're kind of missing out, like, hey, maybe it just means this. We should, I think, more think about how we as Europe will be able to contend against something the likes of China or other Asian countries and US, or even the emerging markets, such as like different countries in South America or in Africa. Like, Europe is quite diverse, quite vast, and we have free movement all around, and anybody can work from anywhere so easily. And then you have the thing with Finland where people get depressed during the winter. Like, doesn't it seem like it would make a lot of sense for a company who values their employees' kind of well-being to support them to be able to work from anywhere in the EU? One thing I do wonder is that in US there are organizations that handle most of the paperwork. If your employees are in different states, but I'm not sure if there's something similar for Europe yet, and what's the bureaucracy needed. But I know that the reverse idea, so foreigners coming to Finland to work, has been now talked a lot in the startup scene and in Finland, that can it be made possible for people to come work remotely from other countries to Finland because of the things that people value there. And I think that's a great idea too. And maybe we have to look again at like what is really our tax base? Should we tax the income more, or actually people living and spending their life in Finland? But yeah, I'd urge like more companies in Finland to, of course, they already think worldwide, but also kind of like European expansion, how to grow a network inside Europe and go from there. Because looking at like just the macroeconomic indicators regarding the US stock market or kind of the US dollar, it's looking like there's a bit of potential, uneven risk in the US market in a long-term view, while it looks like Europe might have a pretty strong foundation to grow from here on out. And I really hope that happens. And companies like, I don't know, Walt are pretty good examples, because they have a natural tendency to grow offices in more and more countries here around Europe. So it's going to be interesting to see.
Yeah, definitely. And I think you're right. Like, Europe has its own special qualities, like how we view data privacy and
Yes,
our shared value base, which is like
even climate related.
Quite different from some other markets like China. So it's like these unique but shared traits within European countries is definitely an asset.
I definitely think even though maybe Finland is a bit of a glowing outlier, but things usually work in a lot of European countries on a systemic level. Even in countries that have only recently joined the EU, as we're working more on like more harmonization and more systems, just something basic like public transport can be said to work on a whole like different level of magnitude in Europe, in any European city. And just stuff like that makes it into an environment which is just more stable and a lot better for long-term views of companies. I mean, we're going kind of derailing on a point, but if you look at the scooter companies that started a few years ago, they started in California, they started in LA, actually in Santa Monica, and they're actually completely wiped out now. The bike paths never supported them enough. People rode them on the sidewalks and it caused huge issues, and the companies just messed up, couldn't really the city didn't really listen to them. The city is completely corrupt here. And just in a few years, it's basically the business has been completely wiped out from Los Angeles. And then you contrast to the European scooter companies who just can throw scooters into a city. And what do you know? The cities already have incredible bike paths. They already have bike stands. And suddenly, naturally, people use the bike paths for the scooters. They leave the scooters near the bike stands. And also, cities are super proactive on working together with these companies to actually make it part of their mobility ecosystem. So that's a real life example. In Europe, things have a tendency to kind of work and think of a long term. While in US, I feel like the environment is going more and more into an unpredictable direction. Maybe that changes now with today, the new president inauguration, but what do you know?
Interesting example, that scooter one. Also doesn't require so much the localization and translation into all European languages. So that's something to think about, at least if intending to grow a European flagship of some kind.
That's a good point.
All right. Well, Joakim, I think we're out of questions now, but I think this talk about remote work and how your life has developed there in LA despite the COVID has been very interesting and probably very helpful for some people who are thinking about applying for Startuplifers.
Yeah, I hope so. And I mean, if anybody has any questions, if you use Telegram, the messaging app, you can send me a message anytime. My nickname is Jommi, Jommi. I'll always respond to any queries. Right.
That is a really nice tip for the people that are wondering about these things and could use a helping hand with the questions. So make sure to...
Yeah, definitely. If you're going to move to LA, message me, because there are many, many, many mistakes. Many mistakes you can make.
Yeah. Definitely get in touch with Joakim on Telegram at Jommi, especially if you're moving to LA. Thank you so much, Joakim, for coming and sharing your story and ideas. Really interesting to hear from somebody who has so much views and experience on the US market, but also startups, funding, establishing your own company and so on. So it's been really, really, really interesting chatting with you. That's it for Leap. Thank you for listening. To hear more stories from Startuplifers and about their adventures in tech startups, you can catch these new episodes released on Spotify, Apple, and wherever you get your podcasts. If you want to apply for a startup job like Joakim's, you can check out the open positions at our website, startuplifers.org. Thank you for listening.